Hey there, guys. Brian here. Just a reminder that you can now support The Other 51. If you go to patreon.com/theother51, you can find out information there on how to make a donation or become a subscriber. Again, that's patreon.com/theother51. Thanks. Now on with the show. Every writer knows that the best conversations about writing don't happen in classrooms or symposia or any other fancy artisanal setting. They happen at the bar, usually after deadline. That's the vibe we're going for here. This is The Other 51, conversations with writers of all genres about writing. I'm Brian Moritz. Today's guest is Tim Bontemps from the Washington Post. Tim Bontemps, welcome to The Other 51. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, man, happy to do it.
Hey, so we're recording this about a week after the start of the NCAA tournament, but let's start with obviously the most important question. How about them Bonnies?
That was pretty cool, man. It was it was neat to be able to be in Dayton for that. It was neat to have them make the tournament. Would have been nice if they'd been one of the teams that went on these Cinderella runs that we've seen from Loyola and some of these other schools. But getting that win over UCLA and Dayton was a pretty neat thing to see, and I'll certainly remember it for a long time.
Now, I saw that you were there. Were you there? Were you covering it, or did you just go as a fan?
I went as a fan. I went. I had a media seat, but I didn't have to write about it. I wrote a column before the game, and if something completely insane had happened, I would have written about it. But it was pretty awful, typical college basketball game, so I didn't really have to do anything but just sit there and try to make sure that I didn't pass out at the end of it.
I don't know, man. It seemed for an ugly game, it seemed pretty beautiful to me, but bias on that one.
I was happy with the outcome, but college basketball is not aesthetically pleasing at this point.
And we'll get into that. I want to get into the difference between college and pro and covering it, but kind of sticking with the Bona thing, because you wrote a great column before the UCLA game last week on kind of what it meant for the program and for the university as an alum to see them get an at-large bid. And I just wonder if you could elaborate a little on that. And someone who I know you grew up close to campus and you went to that school. What did it mean for you to see that happen last week?
Well, I mean, look, it was very neat. Obviously, our school, St. Bonaventure, is a small school. One of the smallest schools in Division I, even though it plays in, arguably the best conference outside the Power Five in the Atlantic 10, are certainly in that mix with the AAC and the Big East. But, 15 years ago, our school was involved in a big scandal for people that don't know. It was this player, Jamil Terrell, that had a welding certificate instead of a junior college degree, and came to school, and the school kind of forced through his eligibility and had him play the whole season. You and Mike Arrington kind of broke it down a couple weeks ago on a podcast, so people go back and listen to that if they haven't. But I got asked by somebody last week, how did that turn into such a big deal, which I couldn't really answer properly because it is kind of strange that one ineligible player turned into a huge thing. But the bottom line is, by the time I got to school that fall, that happened March of my senior year. By the time I got to school that fall, things were in complete chaos, and the coach had been fired. The whole team had basically turned over. The board of trustees president chairman of the board of trustees had killed himself. I mean, that happened literally right before I got on campus. So there's just a lot of aftershocks of that happened. And, it took, really my entire 4 years in school there were an abomination basketball wise. And, that led to the current coach, Mark Schmidt, getting hired at the end of my senior year. And it's just been a long slog back to the place where the program is now, where it's, perennially a very good team and competing for postseason berths. And, for a little tiny school like ours, the basketball program is really kind of the heart of what everybody is connected by as you move away from actually being on campus. That's kind of the one thing that draws people back and gives people a reason to say, hey, that's the school I went to. So for everybody last week, while making the tournament a few years ago in 2012, when Andrew Nicholson was there, when it went on to be a first round pick in the NBA, uh, it was a great thing for the school. It was a different thing than making it on merit to to automatically qualify. And so I think, and especially after a couple of years ago when Bonaventure had a chance to make it and was one of the first teams out of the tournament, and then lost the first game in the NIT, so didn't even give everybody a chance to have a deep NIT run. I think the fact that we're able to make it on merit this time and make the tournament and win a game, beat a team like UCLA. I think it really did officially close the door on, that kind of arc of history for the school. And now we've completely moved past it and are just on to the next thing, which is, it's pretty neat. It's pretty neat. That's why for me, it was pretty neat to be there, to be able to see that. And, as somebody who grew up where, the last time we made an at-large appearance was in 2000, and I lived 40 miles away from school, and our entire school shut down to watch the game because it happened at noon on Thursday. It was the first game of the whole tournament. And, when Bonaventure played Kentucky, it was on every TV in school, and it was on the auditorium on a giant jumbotron, a giant projector screen on stage. So it was very neat to kind of see that come full circle and have Bona back on the big stage and on there on merit. I think it kind of signaled that things have finally officially moved on from everything that happened back then.
Right, and that was that era when they were just coming off of that scandal is when we met. You were a freshman on staff at the student newspaper, and I was kind of serving as an advisor to that sports department of the student paper then. So I got to know. I knew college freshman Tim, so I have the stories. Everyone, I don't. I don't really have the stories, but yeah, you saw some really bad basketball. I only had 1 year of. I only had Anthony Solomon's first year, and they were 7 and I think they were 7-21. But they didn't bottom out until after I had left. But you caught the worst of it, I think.
Yeah, they were a combined 24-89 in the 4 years I was there, and I believe they won 10 conference games or 9 conference games. They went 2-26 my sophomore year. They won 1 conference game against Rhode Island, Jim Barron, former coach's team. They were a wretched program, and it wasn't really. Anthony Solomon was a good guy, but he was, completely over his head and never should have got hired in the first place. That's the thing. The entire circumstance was just a mess from the beginning. And, that's why, when Mark Schmidt, the current coach, got hired, people wouldn't realize it now after the run of success he's had. But, he was actively told not to take the job by a lot of people. And it was considered to be, the worst job in the country. You're in a really good league, a top 8 league in the country. And on top of that, you're dealing with, a school without a lot of financial resources in a bit of a isolated geographic area. It was not a job that people thought could be turned into at that point what Mark has turned it back into. And, that's why, whether he ever gets another job or not at this point, I'm not sure he will. He is already clearly the best coach, in my opinion, the school has ever had. And, the job he has done turning that program around and getting it back to the point it is now is truly a remarkable one to see where it was at the start and where it's gotten to now.
Yeah, I actually covered his first win because his first game, Binghamton played at the Riley Center, and it was Kevin Brodus' first year. Talk about scandal coaches.
That's right.
But it was his first win, and if I remember correctly, I could be wrong. I think Bonaventure students stormed the court that day for beating Binghamton at home.
I think you're right.
That's where the program was when he took over. So I always ask this of the Bonaventure alums I have on here because, as well as anybody, the kind of Bonaventure thing. How do you describe that to people? How do you describe that it's not just our alma mater, it's not just where we went to school, so yay Bonas. What is that thing about Bonas that makes it special?
I think, I don't know if it's necessarily that it makes it special. I think for a lot of people where they went to college, it's where they make it's special to them because of where they went. I think the difference with Bonaventure is just that for a lot of people, it's like a large high school.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a tiny little farm school in the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, it was not like a large high school to me. But I mean, there's only 2,000 undergrads on campus. And that was when I was there, was probably the most students that were ever there. I think it was like 2,200. I mean, it's a school that's vacillated between 1,600 and 2,000 students at a time. So, you just basically know everybody on campus. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is really what the difference is compared to, if you went to like UCLA or Penn State or Ohio State or Michigan or, whatever, one of these giant D1 schools, there's tens of thousands of people on campus. So you meet people and you have friends there and you get to know a lot of people, but it's not, it's different when you basically, if you walk by somebody and you don't know who they are, it's a surprise.
Right.
And I think because of that, it's if you meet somebody that went to the school or know somebody that went to the school, it's far different than if you meet somebody, if you go to UCLA and you run into people from UCLA. I mean, that's, that, especially out here where I live, it's in the West Coast, it's pretty easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, it's really more, to me, it's less about it being it's less about it being necessarily a different place than other colleges. It's more just that it's such a small group of people that went there that understand what it was like to go to this little school in the middle of nowhere, that if you come across somebody else that went there and you know somebody else that went there, I think there's just naturally a tighter bond to it because there's just a lot less people, and it's an experience that you can't. It's a shared experience that a lot less people have. So therefore, the feelings you have about it are a lot stronger than if you went to a place where there were tens of thousands of people that there at a time, and millions of alumni that are from there, like some of these other giant schools that we play against.
Right. So I wanted to ask, because you cover the NBA primarily for the Washington Post, but this weekend you were in Boise for the NCAAs, and you had a heck of a bracket too. You had a really fun set of games there. Wondering how is covering college basketball, and even at the NCAA level, but how's that different than covering NBA basketball?
From a process standpoint, or from a talent standpoint?
Let's do process standpoint.
Well, process wise, it's different because, if you're covering an NBA game, like I go to an NBA game, say it starts at 7:00. Like last night, I was in Sacramento to watch the Pistons Kings game. I get there at games at 7. I get there at 4:30. Dave Yeager, the coach of the Kings, talked at 5:15. Stan Van Gundy, the coach of the Pistons, talked at 5:30. I talked to some coaches on the court for another half hour after that. I went back to the media room. I got some food, did some work. Then I watched the game for 2.5 hours. I went and did some interviews afterward. And normally I would write, but last night I just drove back to San Francisco. So it's a pretty drawn out process, right? Like you got to get there a couple hours before the game. You have to do a lot of pregame work. And then you watch the game, and then you do post-game work. I mean, it turns into a 7-8 hour experience. You go to a college basketball game, you could really show up 3 minutes before the game starts because there's no pregame access. If you need to worry about if a guy's going to play or not, you show up to watch him work out. But otherwise, there's nothing to do before the game. And after the game, for most colleges, it's you get the coach and a player or two at a podium, and that's it. A lot of places don't have open locker rooms like in the NBA. Syracuse kind of famously did under Jim Boeheim, but most other places don't. So, the NCAA tournament's slightly different because they do kind of force teams to have more access, so you can go get more stuff. But, in general, the difference between the pros and colleges from a process standpoint is that the pros act like they're adults, and you have a lot more freedom to talk to people and have kind of the run of things. Whereas when you're covering colleges, it's very controlled. everything is micromanaged, not too dissimilarly from the way the game is played, where the coaches don't really have a lot of control in the NBA on a play-by-play basis, whereas in college they're literally in charge of everything basically, which is partially why the games are a mess. And so that level of control that you see during the games, it really extends to off the court too, because these coaches, they micromanage every detail of the program right down to whether guys are talking to the media or when or how. And so that, that permeates through and does make it more difficult to get that kind of access you want to, tell cool stories from events like that.
Right. So what's access like for you in the NBA?
Well, I mean, like I said, there's pre and post game access at every game. The coaches talk before and after every game and at shoot arounds, the day of every game. It can be hard to get, it's going to be hard to get a guy like LeBron James for a one-on-one interview, but I mean, really outside of him, part of this is because I work at, a place where I can get in most doors just by saying where I work. But I mean, I could get time alone with just about any player in the league. It may not be hours of time, but I can get, if I need 5 or 10 minutes with Giannis Antetokounmpo or Anthony Davis or, Paul George or, James Harden, pretty much everybody but LeBron and Russell Westbrook. LeBron, just because there's a million people asking for him, and he's honestly so good in group settings. You can get whatever you need from LeBron anyway, and you don't really need it. And Russell Westbrook, because he just won't do anything with the media at all. Otherwise I can pretty much get anybody that I need to for a story. So, there's times when you like the access to be better. It'd be nice if, they have pregame access. I don't necessarily go into the locker room a lot because a lot of times it's not very beneficial. A lot of the new arenas now, they have like places where you can kind of hide from the media for half an hour and not be in there when the media is in there, which a lot of guys take advantage of. But, still, I really enjoy dealing with NBA players. I find it the best league to cover by a lot. You look at sports like baseball or football where the players are kind of taught to be part of this larger group framework, and they don't really say much interesting because much of any interest to anybody because they're kind of taught to conform to the wider group norms and not to break outside of that. Whereas basketball is a sport that is built on individualism and creativity, and so you tend to find a lot more interesting people in the sport just because of that. And like the kind of people that are drawn to it are the kind of people you want to talk to. And there's also the fact that it's a sport that, it is, other than soccer, the most international sport. So, I think 30% of the NBA is from overseas somewhere. So you have people from South America, you have people from Europe, you have people from Asia, so people from Africa. So you get a much wider meld of cultures and personalities and thoughts. And, I think that's why you've seen, a lot more players and coaches in the NBA willing to speak out than in the other sports on various social issues because they're just, I think in a lot of ways just more aware of what's going on. So for me, it's a far more interesting league to cover, and I really enjoy the fact that I'm able to do it every day.
So, and I wanted to ask you about kind of how you choose your stories and how you find them, because being a national NBA reporter, especially for an outlet like the Post, I mean, how do you pick your stories? It would seem to me that you kind of you can kind of throw a dart and I want to do this story. How much do you come up with versus how much is driven by the news of what's happening around the league? How do you decide what to write about, what games you're going to and all of that?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, you could definitely throw a dart at the wall and hit about 27 stories at this point. I mean, the NBA, for a long time, it's tried to move itself to a place where it is a 24/7, 365-day league, and it's gotten pretty damn close to that. I mean, basically now, the month of August is generally the only down period on the calendar. And frankly, I was getting on a plane to go to Spain in August of last year, and as I was walking to my gate was when Kyrie Irving got traded. So, I mean, it's literally become, at minimum an 11-month a year sport, and really farther than that. I mean, football has probably 2 or 3 months at least a year where it's pretty dead.
Mm-hmm.
And basketball has far outpaced that now. I mean, it goes from mid-September until August 1st at minimum. So, and there's stories all the time. I mean, just over the last couple months, I mean, there's issues with the refs all the time now. There's, the whole thing with the Mavericks and the Me Too movement. There was the trade deadline before that. Guys are getting hurt left and right. And that's all without really getting into stuff that's happening on the court. So, I mean, in terms of how I go about finding stories, I mean, some of it is, if something happens that I need to react to, I will do that. Like yesterday, I had to write a column about Ty Lue, the coach of the Cavs, having to take a leave of absence because he was sick. So I was working on something else and pivoted to that. On Sunday, on our centerpiece was a Me Too story, and the Mavs had been working on for a couple of weeks in the wake of that story coming out and how the NBA would respond to stuff like that, or to that situation and try to prevent it moving forward. So there is kind of a blend of if there's news, react to it, and if there's not, like a lot of times, like I was in Detroit, I was in Sacramento last night to write a bigger story about the Pistons that'll come out later this week. So if I'm here in the Bay Area, if there's teams that are coming through here, I will kind of target like, okay, if like Utah's going to be here Sunday, I have a couple stories I want to write about them. Or, Detroit was here last night, so I drove out to Sacramento to see them and gather some stuff for a story I want to write about them. So, I'll kind of pick and choose off the calendar, like, okay, this team's coming through. What's a good story I can write about them when they're here and I have access to them, and then I'll do it. So I think, I think it's a combination of all that stuff, but it really, to go back again to what you said at the beginning, the NBA really at this point, there's just so much stuff going on, considering I'm the only guy at my place really doing this. We have some bloggers and stuff, but you look at like, our pal, Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN, who also is a Bonta guy, they've got 20 people, 30 people covering the league. And, his old place at Yahoo had several people, and Sports Illustrated has several people. And, I'm by myself in a lot of ways. So it is hard sometimes to try to keep up with the tide when there's just an overwhelming amount of news, and, I couldn't physically get to all of it every day if I even wanted to.
Right. And how long have you been living on the West Coast now?
About 18 months. I moved out here just before the start of the prior season, 2016-17 season.
Right. And that was the first season that with Durant had gone out to the Warriors, right?
Yeah, I had he is from Washington, and I had started the Post prior, about a year earlier, the fall in November of 2015. So I jumped in the middle of the 24-game win streak for the Warriors that year. I mean, that was, I was working at the New York Post. I started mid-November of 2015, and it was right in the middle of that streak. So right off the bat, I was covering that, and things kind of took off from there. And I was living in New York at the time, and during the playoffs, I'd been on the road about 50 out of 60 days or 55 days, covering the Spurs Thunder series, then the Thunder Warriors series, and the Warriors Cavs series, all of which went at least 6 games. Last 2 went 7. And so I covered that whole playoffs, and then Durant signed with the Warriors on the day before, the day of, and the day after he signed, which was the 4th of July. I combined to get 2.5 million hits on 3 stories. So I told my bosses that, in my opinion, if I could do the job from anywhere, like they had said I could initially, even though I like living in New York a lot, we probably should be out here around this team. And they thought that was a good idea. So I moved out here, and I've been out here ever since.
I was wondering if you could kind of trace your career path. You mentioned how you were at the Post before the Post, but going from New York to Washington, kind of traced, going back from Bonaventure to now, and kind of how you got to where you are.
Well, I mean, the short answer is I got very lucky. I got very lucky. I was I grew up near Bonaventure. I went to school there. And when I was a freshman, I got introduced to Mike Vaccaro and to Woj, both of whom were really great to me along the way. And so by the time I got done with my senior year of college in 2007, I was interviewing for a few different jobs, and I was ready to go to Clinton, South Carolina. I got called on like a Wednesday. They wanted me to fly down there and interview for this job at this rinky-dink little paper in the middle of nowhere. Clinton, South Carolina is like a 5,000 circulation newspaper, like an hour from Hilton Head, I think. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'll fly down there. I didn't really have another option. I was at home working on my parents' farm, and I needed to get a job. So I was gonna go down there and interview and basically get this job. And then Vaquero calls me while I'm in my parents' pasture feeding our calves, and told me that there was a opening as basically an agate clerk at the Post, which I would write once a week, and then I would spend 4 nights a week doing the agate pages, which are the standings pages and the horse racing pages in the newspaper. So I said, yeah, sure, that sounds like a lot better option than Clinton, South Carolina. So I went down there, interviewed, got the job. I spent 2 or 3 years basically just doing that. And then when my boss at the time, Greg Gallo, retired, the now current sports editor at the New York Post, Chris Shaw, took over, and he gave me a lot more opportunities to get out and start reporting on stuff more. Managed to get some good stories out of that, gradually work my way up over time. Eventually, I could see there was going to be an opening on the NBA because the guy who covered the New Jersey Nets at the time, Fred Kerber, didn't want to cover the team when it moved to Brooklyn in 2012. And I was a big NBA fan, so I kind of targeted that as the job I wanted to try to get. So I actually was there the night the lockout ended in 2011, sat around till 5 o'clock in the morning and wrote that story, and then covered the lockout year. That was when Jeremy Lin went crazy with Linsanity and all that stuff was going on. So I covered the Knicks and Nets basically that entire lockout season. And then that summer of 2012, I got promoted to the Nets beat, and just as they moved to Brooklyn. So I covered the first 3 full seasons the Nets are in Brooklyn, and then I got hired at the Washington Post in November of 2015. And then here I am.
I love the image of you getting that phone call in your parents' pasture. That's the best.
It's 100% true. I had a flip phone. I had a flip phone in my pocket and answered it, and it was Vac calling me. I was very confused. I was very happy.
I'm wondering, when you were in those years, you were an agate clerk at the Post and writing, like you said, I think 1 day a week and something like that. I mean, what kept you going? Did you ever kind of think, did you ever start to wonder, am I going to get my chance to really do this? Or is this, did you get frustrated? Did you get, I guess kind of more, what made you kind of persevere on that?
I didn't really have another option.
Okay.
I had always wanted to do this since I was about 10 years old. I decided back then that I wasn't going to be a pro athlete, but I could go to games for free and that would be fun. So I should try to be a sports writer. And that was kind of what I always had in my head. Even, most people bounce around at 20 different career paths, but I never really had another one in my head the whole time. So, I should have gotten a job, about 6 months after I got to the Post, at a nearby paper, a pretty big paper. Didn't get the job for rather spurious reasons, and so that was frustrating. And then I had applied for a million other jobs, and I got interviewed for one other one, which didn't work out either. But I had probably applied for 100 jobs, and wasn't even getting calls back really. I was getting very frustrated, and my current boss at the time, Greg Gallo, was not really keen on me for whatever reason. It didn't seem like I was really going to get an opportunity at the Post, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I thought about going to law school at one point. I kind of bounced around to a lot of stuff, and then one day, I think in like August or September of 2009, I walked in the office and was just told, Greg's retiring in a month, which came out of nowhere. I think he retired at like 62. He retired young. Just kind of came out of nowhere. And like I said, once Chris Shaw took over for him, things really changed a lot for me in a pretty quick way, because he saw I had some talent and was willing to work hard. And so he really gave me opportunities to try to do stuff and to go out and report stuff and, cover some Ranger stress. And Larry Brooks needed time off and go cover tournament sites and different stuff that they needed me to do. And, really gave me the opportunity to get out and do stuff. And, and the result was, I was able to get my foot in the door, which is really all I knew I ever needed. If I ever got my foot in the door, I'd be fine. And, the fact that I was able to kind of led to everything else. But, there were certainly times, back those first couple of years where, I thought about just saying the hell with it. But if I'd had something else I'd thought about in the past that I had wanted to do, there's a decent chance I probably would have. But there wasn't really that thing that was sitting there. I was like, yeah, I can go do that. And so because of that, I kind of stuck around, for a lack of better options. And, it worked out nicely in the end.
Yeah, you could have always taught. That's what that's what happens when you can't do. You teach.
That's right. Right.
I'm wondering, how is it different when your beat is a team, like when you were covering the Nets, versus now when you're covering your beat is a league, an entire league? Because it's still a beat job, but how's it different?
Well, I mean, it's different. It's different in a lot of ways. I mean, it's different in scope, obviously, because you're dealing with the whole league, and it's different in terms of, when you're on a beat, the minutia matters a lot, right? Like whether certain guys are playing on a given night, or what the injury status of guys is, or what the minutia of a beat matters a lot more. And I really enjoyed covering the Nets. It was a wild few years I was there. A lot of stuff happened, and I enjoyed being around a team and kind of knowing every single thing that was going on with that team. I mean, it was fun to be part of a situation like that, where you kind of had to, dig around and figure out what was going on. And you always knew a lot more than you could write. And it was kind of fun to have the inside story on stuff. Whereas when you're looking at covering an entire league, in the situation I'm in, and especially now at the newspaper I work at, a lot of times I'm looking at stuff from 10,000 feet. And the goal is to write kind of overarching stories that discuss broad themes, like this Maverick story I just wrote recently about, kind of how is the league going to respond to the Me Too movement arriving at its doorstep. Like stories like that kind of, span wider arcs are a lot more important, because you're trying to encapsulate stuff that's going on across the league. As opposed to one specific team, or if something happens, how does it relate to other teams in the league? So the job is the same, like you said, but the way you attack it is slightly different, because you have to look at everything through the lens of how does this impact the wider league, as opposed to how does this impact this specific team.
Right. What's the best thing you've read lately?
What's the best thing I've read lately? I don't know if I have a great answer to that, because my brain is so fried from everything that's been going on. You know what I'll say? My friend Brian Windhurst, one of my best friends, just wrote a really cool story about LeBron James and how his back was really messed up a couple of years ago, and it looked like his career might be not necessarily in jeopardy, but he might not be able to keep up the same level of work that he'd been doing in the past from an on and off court standpoint. And he got hooked up with this former Navy SEAL, I think, some kind of military guy, I'm pretty sure a Navy SEAL, who had actually injured his back in I think a paragliding accident. And he developed these training methods to heal himself, basically, and did them with LeBron. And LeBron is now going to play 82 games this year, most likely for the first time in his career, and has kind of gotten over everything. And it was a neat story that included the anecdote that LeBron actually gained 7 pounds in a playoff game once.
Really?
Which has kind of set the world on fire. Yeah, but it was a very good story that I'd encourage people to read. And I'd also, now that I think about it more, I'd also encourage people to go read my buddy Jerry Brewer's column from Friday night when UMBC beat Virginia. Jerry Jerry's one of the best columnists in the country. Works for me at the Post, and I thought he did an amazing job, kind of chronicling that pretty wild night. And I guess one other thing is, anybody who is interested in the Bonaventure, like this Bonaventure thing, more can go to the Bona blog and read my guy Vaccaro's 7,000, 20,000 word stories about the season. And if you want real insight into what it means to be a crazy Bonaventure fan, Vac is the epitome of it. His stuff was pretty great, and it's worth checking out if you want to see that.
If you want to understand that Bonaventure thing, the Selection Sunday thing where he drove from New Jersey to Bonaventure, which is 5.5 hours, basically because his wife told him to get out of the house.
Yeah,
you need to be there.
Story. It was a great story. He texted me that morning. I woke up out here. I want to say it was probably 9 o'clock, and I woke up and I had a text from him, and it said, You won't believe where I am. And so I called him and I said, you're either in the car on your way to school, you're at school, or you're going to the airport to fly to school. So which is it? And he said, I'm in the car on 17. I was like, yeah, that's what I thought.
So. I would have guessed in the locker room, but yeah, same area, same deal.
Well, it was still early enough that I knew he wasn't quite there yet. But it was. So if anybody is interested in kind of the inner workings of Bonaventure fandom, Vac is a terrific writer anyway, but he was in his wheelhouse writing about that stuff, so it was pretty neat.
Yeah, I can recommend best thing I've read in the last week or so is a feature from, I think it was GQ, The Penance of John Calipari. Is a profile by Reed Forgrave, and it was a magazine profile of Calipari, but it was really interesting. And I think about Cal a lot because he's a guy who, was so hated and kind of reviled for the longest time in college sports. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but he almost seems like he was way ahead of his time, and like everything that he's talked about and done is kind of become accepted wisdom, whether it's the one and done or advocating that players should be compensated or whatever. But I thought it was an interesting piece about a guy who I know people have a lot of strong opinions on. So
I haven't got a chance to read that piece yet, but I heard about it. And Calipari, I was in Boise where he was, and Calipari's an interesting dude. And I have no doubt that Reed wrote a very interesting story about him.
Yeah. So, Tim, if people want to follow you and follow what's going on in the NBA from your perspective, where's the best place to do that?
You can follow me on Twitter at Tim Bontemps, Tim and then BONTEMPS. I do a podcast posting up about the NBA, though I haven't done one in a minute. I got to do one again today or tomorrow. And then obviously go subscribe to the Washington Post and read my stuff there. It's much appreciated.
Excellent. Well, this has been a lot of fun catching up. Appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Happy to do it.
As always, thanks for listening to The Other 51. You can find show notes for this episode and all our episodes at sportsmediaguy.com on the Other 51 tab. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I can highly recommend Overcast for this. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.